Perfect, thanks. First of all, welcome everybody. I appreciate you coming out on Valentine's night for our community meeting for the improvements on English High Courts. Next. As you just saw, tonight's meeting is going to be recorded, so we ask that people be courteous, and if people are not able to attend tonight, the recording will be posted at the website at the bottom of the screen. So please share with any of your friends or tennis players or basketball players or pickleball that may not have been able to join us. Next. So just our typical virtual meeting etiquette, we want to ensure that this conversation is a pleasant experience for everybody that's on and taking time to be here with us. Be respectful of each other's time, and during the Q&A section, please just ask one question at a time and allow time for your fellow neighbors to join in as well. Please keep the questions and comments project specific and yielding a solution-driven discussion. Please, as I mentioned, please wait till all attendees had the opportunity to ask a question before you ask your second one. If we do run over, which I don't anticipate tonight, but just in case, my contact is listed here, so please do not hesitate to reach out and speak directly. Thank you. Next. So just Zoom tips. I don't see anybody calling in, so I think we're good on that. We are going to be utilizing the chat feature, which great. I see several people are already using it, and thank you from Councillor Kendra Lara's office for attending. So throughout the presentation, don't hesitate to type questions or anything in that. I'll do my best to be answering those as we're going along. When we get to the end of the presentation, we ask that you turn your cameras on, and as you raise your hand by clicking the little hand feature, will allow you to unmute yourself and you can ask your question. Next. So our agenda for this evening is just a project team introduction, going over the project overview, existing conditions, presentation on what the solution that we're going to be presenting. Then we're going to have a listening discussion and a closing. Next. As I said before, my name is Nathan Frazee. I'm the project manager from Boston Parks and Recreation. Shauna is our moderator tonight. So Christine cannot be here, but Christina is our outreach coordinator and external affairs. So anything regarding friends groups or anything like that, she would be the point of contact for that. Our design team is Weston and Sampson, and we have Brandon and Farah from them tonight. I also included the Office and Neighborhood Services rep, Tiffany, contact here. So if there's anything that's not project specific, but that whether it's adjacent issues or anything like that, she would be a great contact for that. Next. So just looking at our project schedule, we're here tonight, February 14th. We'll be working on producing drawings based on this conversation and putting the project out for bid. We will be looking at a construction this summer. As you can see, that I can tell you the construction is not going to take all summer long, but we're going to be working around Tenacity's schedule because they use the location for camps. So depending on the contractor that wins and the timing and sequence of the construction, if we can get it done before camp, maybe. If not, we'll do it later in the season and immediately following camp. We have typically for courts citywide, we have an annual anticipated construction of about $800,000. This one, you can see our estimate is a little bit higher. It's at the 1.1 million. It's because really we're dealing with two different courts on one site. We're dealing with the basketball court and the tennis courts. And then both locations have lighting. So that fee is a little bit higher, but it really makes sense for us to tackle all of the problems here at once rather than leaving some dated lights and trying to just manage with those. So that's what we're looking at. We're hoping for either a late fall opening at the latest for both the basketball and the tennis locations. Next. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brandon and Farah to go over the existing conditions.
Thanks, Nate. And Farah, I'm just gonna give a little bit of introduction here, and then I'll hand it over to you, and you can walk through the finer points of some of the existing conditions, as well as some of the opportunities that we think are available on the site. Folks, thank you again for joining us this evening. We're really honored to be here. We have done many courts throughout the city of Boston for many years now. We've worked with Nate, I think probably at least since 2018, Nate, does that sound about right? On several court projects. We really love doing them for you, for the city. We think they're a very important amenity. They provide a lot of recreational value and activity. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Farah, who will walk through some of our own observations based on the conditions of the court, but I'm sure you folks are all very well aware of them. And we look forward to hearing some of your feedback related to not only the existing conditions so that we can make sure we address them, as well as some of the opportunities or amenities that we're proposing this evening to make sure we get it right. We want to make sure that you guys are heard and that we're providing the most value for you folks in the neighborhood. So with that, Farah, why don't you take over?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Brandon and Nate. So the presentation is going to be split into two pieces. So the first, we'll talk about basketball, and then we'll talk about the tennis area just sort of across the way from the site. In terms of basketball, the court is surrounded by fencing. There are 2 basketball courts on site at the moment, and lighting, as Nate mentioned. Sort of this is the existing conditions. We've got the 2 basketball courts, fencing all around, adjacent to the existing fields on site. We have I guess we've identified this utility cabinet that's going to be staying there. It's pretty important for other site features and will remain. At the moment, the existing conditions is some of the issues we identified are around drainage. This area, particularly this corner of the site, is the lowest point, and it's sort of collecting a lot of debris and dust. And at least when Nate and I went out to the site, it was there was at least an inch of mud just in this like very, very corner of the site. And so we're looking at how we can improve that drainage of the site so that that doesn't happen, and that playing can be extended. The playing time can be extended just by looking at these drainage issues and correcting some of those, or providing a better drainage plan. The proposed looks the same as existing. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. Maybe if you could, though, jump back to the previous image. I think that was helpful, specifically related to, I want to point out the existing court lights for folks, and just notice the pure height of them, as well as the fixtures that are on top of those posts. And I'm sure you've experienced it, particularly if you live nearby or happen to drive by in the evenings. The poles are actually quite high, and that is as a result of the quality or the output of the outdated fixtures. As part of this project, as Nate mentioned, lighting is a key component. And so the fixtures we'll be adding or proposing are much more efficient. They allow for lower light poles and greater output, more focused output. So that is a key part of this project. And it's hard to tell in this image But I think if you look off into the distance towards the left with the backstop of the baseball field, you can see where her cursor is. This is a bright blue sunny day, and there's actually a little bit of a puddle down in that corner already from probably some standing water from a storm. And you can just see the general conditions of the court themselves. They're pretty tired. They at least minimally need a resurfacing, but we want to make sure we're getting many years of use and experience, enjoyment out of these courts. So if we were to go back to that aerial image of the existing conditions, and it's a little blurred out, but if you squint real closely, you can even see there's a bit of a triangular shadow in that corner. And that's all just dirt sediment from buildup that Farah is mentioning, where it's about an inch thick. So part of this will be, one, not even improving the surface drainage, but also cleaning out and making sure that the drainage system below the courts and into the storm system are also functioning as well, so that you don't get standing water. Back to you, Farah.
Yep. Nope. Great observations and comments. And so the proposed conditions aren't really changing the courts that are there. It's just resurfacing, looking at new fencing, and then, as Brandon mentioned, new lighting that will consolidate and kind of provide a more focused lighting plan. All right. Brandon, does that seem all right?
Yeah, Farah, that's
All
great.
right, nice, great. We may end up, I think the entry point is going to shift slightly just to accommodate the that change, but it won't be too far off from where it's existing. And then moving on to the tennis courts, and we'll have a moment for folks to provide comment on both of these, but we'll present the tennis courts and then we'll talk about an overall, and we'll open it up for discussion. Moving on to the tennis courts, these are some existing condition photos. Some areas where there's puddling. As Brandon mentioned, we went out there on a fairly, I mean, maybe there's some clouds rolling in, but a fairly clear day, and it was there was already puddles on the ground. There's already just, and you can see sort of cracking in the pavement, and the lights at the tennis courts are also quite dated, and updating those would be a part of this program. The access point from we're limited in this site from, in terms of the access points. So there is one access point from this stair that will remain. This entryway, this main entryway from the field will remain. And it's just looking at improving the conditions overall. Existing on site, there are four existing tennis courts, and sort of fencing all around, and then a fence that sort of separates the 3 tennis courts on the right from the one on the left. And then looking at proposed conditions, we've done so, I guess, Nate, maybe you can speak to some of this, but we are looking at a reconfigured arrangement of the tennis courts.
Yeah, so I think we do have a good amount of pickleball representation here, hopefully some tennis as well. One of the things I'm sure most people are aware is that pickleball has been gaining popularity, and we have been dealing with a lack of facilities for pickleball. Our initial reaction was to do overlay courts as much as possible, just to at least accommodate the existing nets for tennis, to provide a quick solution to expand pickleball. What we've seen in that is that oftentimes that can become problematic for tennis players and create a conflict on a court we didn't have conflict at beforehand. So what we're looking at here is how could we expand pickleball with doing the least impact to tennis as possible. As I mentioned earlier, tennis is, or this location is used by Tenacity, so the amount of courts they could use, the more the better for their camps. One of the things we've talked with them about is just looking at the solution is that, you know, for educational purposes and everything, the pickleball courts could still be used for their camp. So realistically, they're actually not losing any space for camp. It's actually potentially making it a little bit easier for them to run some of the clinics with the smaller kids. So we did a whole exercise where we basically made the pickleball and the tennis courts movable pieces, and we tried to move them around to see what's the most optimal for the most amount of tennis and the most amount of pickleball we could provide. As you all may know, the tennis here are situated quite close together to the point it's hard for me to squeeze through the posts. So one of the things that actually allowed us a little bit more room to spread those courts out was taking that first court that on this image here went from the bottom of the page to the top. Farah, do you mind circling it with your cursor? The court on the left there. By changing that to pickleball, which is a shorter width, we actually can move that fence over and we can spread, not a lot, but we can spread the tennis courts posts apart a little bit and get several more inches at each court. So hopefully that'll allow for easier access across them. And the other thing we would be doing with this is that in this condition, we will not be painting pickleball lines over top of the tennis courts. So those 3 tennis courts will remain just tennis courts, and the pickleball will remain just pickleball. And we're hoping that to get some feedback from you all to see if this is the most accommodating situation for both user groups. So.
Yeah. And I think I see a comment sort of commenting that the orientation is a little confusing. I think to clarify, Union Avenue is much higher in elevation. So there is this shadow here that you can see is actually a huge retaining wall, and the tennis courts are below. And if I circle back, this picture here is taken from atop those stairs, looking down. So, and so is this one. So, and this is the retaining wall that I'm referring to, and Union Ave would be just on the other side of this fence. So hopefully that clarifies the orientation or kind of what you're looking at as you see here. So these are stairs here that take you all the way down to the tennis court surface. All right. The same as we said, there will be sort of fencing updates, as well as a fence separating between the 4 pickleball courts and the 3 tennis courts. And sort of in this next slide, here are some images from around the city on different improvements that have taken place on different various courts. And I think that concludes our presentation, and I see questions coming in, which is great. And
Can you go back?
Keep them coming. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you go back to the previous, the layout
Yes.
plan of that
Yeah,
courts?
Yep.
Well, I'm reading through the
Yeah. Yeah.
through the comments on the chat as well. So
Yes, me too.
in the meantime of that, I see one hand is raised from Ellen. Ellen, I'm gonna click so you can unmute yourself there.
Thank you very much. I'll also go on camera. So, couple questions. I missed the very beginning, and you may have included this, but having played in these courts, it's hard for me to imagine 4 courts going in the current space that the one court that's in that fenced-in area is, currently inhabits. Are you increasing the size of that space?
The only
No,
thing
we-
that's
no.
changing, the only thing that's changing is the interior fence line between the tennis courts and the proposed pickleball courts. The perimeter fence, we're pretty much locked in by grade changes or retaining walls or parking lots. We're not expanding the overall footprint. This is all within the existing footprint. The only thing that changes between the 2 courts, again, like I mentioned, is that fence line in the middle.
It's just without being there and looking, it's hard to know, but I know myself, I had this question and Karen McCormick raised this. If any of you know Karen, she's not here right today with us, I think. But I'm hard pressed. I don't want to be controversial, but it just doesn't seem very easy to fit 4 courts in that space with enough room to move around beyond the court lines to where people are playing. I don't know. I trust people have measured it. It's just, it's not a very large space. I mean, usually 2 pickleball courts fit in beautifully in 1 tennis court. So to be making 4 courts in 1 tennis court is just kind of like, are you sure that's gonna fit? And I don't mean to be difficult, I'm sorry.
You are in no way difficult. Those are all fair questions.
No.
The one thing I will note on this court, and I think that same question, because I think, is it Martha? I'm sorry, I lost the chat for a minute here, but somebody else mentioned that Martha mentioned that same thing. Is the existing conditions has that for the tennis as well? If you notice the upper tennis court, that
Mhm.
upper corner of that is pretty close to that fence as well. So what we did at South Street was over 2 courts, we were able to space 3 pickleball on each side. And now where we have 3 courts, we did a similar spatial layout of that. One of the things I will say, and talking with Karen and Craig, is that we put those closer together than is probably ideal, right? So what I would be curious from pickleball people is, would it be more optimal to increase the space between them and only have 3 of them, but at least have increased space? I don't play well, I do play pickleball sometimes, but I don't want to admit it to Karen because she always tries to get me to play when I see her. And I'm embarrassed how bad she would beat me. So I'm open to hear that discussion. That's the feedback we're here for tonight. So don't feel like any of that's controversial or gonna mess the system up. We want to be hearing that input.
The
So-
only other thing, and then I'll pass it on, is just looking for both the tennis courts and the pickleball courts. Are people going to be running into the fence on the area where the fence looks pretty close, not on the sides, but behind you?
I think we did the minimum setback for what the regulations were, which is the
Correct.
same for the tennis. We did the absolute minimum we could just to try and buy as much wiggle room as we could get.
I think what might be helpful, Nate, is we can share a plan once we develop this a little further based on the feedback tonight that would give the overall dimensions and the relationship within the space.
Yep. So I see, I think Hannah, you were the next up. I'm gonna unmute you, but I'm also, as you're getting unmuted, I'm going to respond to a few of the comments in the chat. There's some comments about an unofficial entry at the Brookside Ave
Yeah.
location. I'm curious to see, because I didn't see that when I was out there.
It's a hole in the
So
fence, to be perfectly clear.
That-
That's been
that's
there
right,
for
'cause
as
I
long as we've
noticed it
lived
as well.
here.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
it's used, but it's not an official entrance at all.
Mhm.
But I think the reason why it could be useful to have an entrance on the Brookside Ave side, and then I'll go into my broader comments, is because to enter what you are showing on this figure as the tennis courts, you have to go through what used to be the single tennis court. What you're proposing now would be the 4 pickleball courts.
Right, right.
So if it's
I'm
possible
curious.
to add an official entrance in the fence, it could ensure that people aren't trying to transit across courts quite as much for safety
Sure.
reasons too.
Is it up at the corner, Farah? Do you mind?
So
Is it,
this corner here,
No,
No,
well, there's
Right.
another hole in the fence, like by the football field. I don't see folks
Huh.
using that one quite as much because it's not within the tennis court area. It's
Mhm.
on like the Brookside Ave, like right next to that white car. That's,
oh, here.
yeah.
so what I'll just respond to that and then I'll let you ask your question. Typically we try not to have entrances and exits to our parks that are on private property. And I'm not sure, is that Brookside Ave a private drive? I thought it was. Either way, I'll look into if that's a possibility, and we can certainly try and make sure we accommodate that. I agree to some of the comments that, and I've seen that where we fix what we perceive as just a hole in the fence, and then we find out that that's a man-made hole for entry. So we certainly don't want to make it more difficult to get into the courts. But I'll be able to come back to you all just about the logistics of if I can actually put a gate there. So
I know, is
All
it
right.
okay to ask my?
yes,
my question?
yes.
Okay.
Now your question, yeah.
Great. Well, just want to thank you all for making this time and space for us to talk about this together as community members. I live right nearby. My husband and I regularly play tennis at these courts and really value them as a community asset for our neighbors as well. We've got a running doubles game and we've met a lot of people in the neighborhood through playing there. My question, I think, is about, how we're thinking about the balance between these two sports. I understand that pickleball is a growing trend nationally, certainly since the pandemic. But there are other courts nearby, in particular those on South Street, that are primarily pickleball. Those are really nice tennis courts that are regularly used by pickleballers. And I know that there's also basketball courts, so there's a lot going on there for sure. But my question is primarily because that single tennis court is often used for folks who are working on serving or maybe taking a lesson and that kind of a thing. And having that ability to really just whack a ball when you're trying to practice is really valuable. Because if you were to do that on the grouping of tennis courts that are all together presented on this figure on the right side, it would be really disruptive to other folks that are playing or practicing themselves. And so I just wanted to share that as one way that people are actively using those courts that I think unfortunately would be something that would be amiss with this plan.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I think one of the things, the main reason why we felt taking the single tennis and converting that is, one, we've heard complaints from the South Street location is that it oftentimes can't be used for tennis now because it is so popular for pickleball there. And because it's so popular for pickleball, it's overrun with pickleball. So it's already exceeded the amount of space for the users that are trying to use pickleball there as well. So we're trying to expand and provide more opportunity for that. And when we looked at where I mentioned earlier about kind of moving the pieces around to see what was the most ideal, as soon as we left that single tennis, it drastically reduced the amount of either pickleball or tennis. So we would lose one and only be able to have 2 tennis and then potentially 4 pickleball, which would make a lot more space around all of them. That's true, but it would also reduce the amount of courts that tenacity and tennis would have for opportunity. And we felt like that the loss of a whole other court may not justify the change. So I'm curious outside of Tenacity, do you feel that the tennis courts, maintaining 3 of them is the most ideal? And I think you can still unmute. Can you? I'm gonna let you unmute because there you go.
Yeah, I can. So your question was, like my comments beyond tenacity? Sorry, I was a little unclear what you were asking.
So I'm saying if we were to keep that single court as a tennis, we would then have to do a drastic change for the other courts, and we would most likely need to only go down to 2 tennis courts. And I'm curious if the loss of a whole other
2 tennis courts
court,
total for the whole plan.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, that's really unfortunate, and definitely I think not a trade-off that folks playing tennis would want to make. I think my question is, as somebody who's played lots of tennis on courts that have lines, I don't enjoy it. It can be distracting, but I wonder if it would give us more flexibility to have, like, to keep the tennis courts as tennis courts, but to have at least some of them lined, and then certain hours or schedules that were permitted, that were specifically reserved, as I know some pickleball groups already do. And that has helped to find balance, because I just, as somebody who doesn't play pickleball but only tennis, I can imagine that I would feel frustration if the tennis courts were all in use, as they were just last week on a random 50-ish day in February. These are weird days for Boston for sure, but it's nice to see that folks really want to get out there when they can. And if the pickleball courts were unoccupied, we just can't use them for tennis in the same way. Whereas it seems like if they remained as tennis courts, pickleballers are still able to use them the way that they do their sport as well.
I guess perhaps the question is, are folks open to having pickleball lines on a tennis court? If that allows us to add on another tennis court, or provides more flexibility if there's an opening or a tennis event that allows either a pickleball to use it if it's free, or tennis to use it? Or do people want pure one or the other, so that they have no mixing of the stripes, no confusion, no combination of games, whether or not it's tennis in one court, pickleball right next door? And don't get me started on the noise. I know that's very controversial, so I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, just briefly, I'm not the only person here for sure, and then I'll stop talking entirely. But one thing I really love Play Local, the way that you're able to reserve the courts, and my husband and I use that like 95% of the time in season, and really like knowing that we have a reliable way to reserve a court. I believe they also allow you to reserve pickleball too. So I'm not sure if the city is working in partnership with them as these modifications are being made to reflect the modalities of the courts, but I think that's also a great way to either build in some back end kind of ways to have equity between the two camps, but also to make sure that people aren't trying to go out and play their sport and are being met with an unexpected crowd, that kind of thing. I'll stop now. Thank you for again for the time.
Thank you. And Marie, I see your hands up, and I'm gonna, there you go.
Okay, sorry. My son decided to practice the piano.
All right, sounds wonderful. So not gonna complain.
No, thank you guys for reaching out, because I had sent you guys a note about this, and I'm with Hannah all the way. I probably see you there. I play 2, 3, 4 times a week there, and I get very disoriented with the pickleball stripes over at Stony Brook now that they've been repainted, and I don't even try to go to South Street because it is so crowded. I am wondering, will we get 4 users or 8 or how many it is for pickleball here? Usually when I'm playing at English, there's only one team of pickleball that will show up at a time. But someone said if you build them, they will come. So maybe that is true. It does seem crowded. So maybe we don't need 4. Is there any way? And I second Hannah in saying that that separate court on the left is really used for practice. I I train there every Sunday morning. And he has lessons from like 7 on to like 2 p.m. So
Mhm.
people train there and bring coaches in, and that's like a nice secluded court for that. So I'd hate to see that go for pickleball. No offense. Is there any way to like trade out one of the tennis courts on the right for 2 pickleball courts? Is a question. And then we could keep the separate one on the left, 2 tennis courts on the right with
Mhm.
2 pickleball on the right as well.
Mhm.
But otherwise, I'm just thrilled that there will not be cracks and the balls won't go flying when they hit the cracks, and the lights are amazing, so we could play late at night. So I thank you for all of that.
Sure.
That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, and so when we looked at that scenario, we could fit 2 pickleball in the space that there's a single tennis on the right-hand side of the plan. And that will get us three tennis, but only 2 pickleball. So that's where we felt like this was retaining the same amount of tennis, but it was at least getting us twice as many pickleball. Obviously, now hearing some of the concerns about the potential pinching of that is one thing. There's also been some comments about if we're looking at seating options at all in this. Like the one thing is, because we're already too tight for what we're realistically trying to plan and put in here. If we do want to incorporate any seating, it would have to be on the exterior of the fence. So inside the where Farah's cursor is right now.
Mhm.
So realistically, we can't be putting any seating inside. But we can continue to explore that kind of that concept. Again, the trade-off, and so I'm curious on the pickleball people is they would be getting half the amount of courts. The other thing that's out is distinctly different about this one from South Street and some of the other courts is that this will have dedicated pickleball nets. So like myself, I have paddles, but I don't have a net. I know some people do have net, but it can be an added labor for them to have to be bringing nets for their own games. So this would be having permanent pickleball nets for them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I
Your son's
wonder,
beautiful, by the way.
Would yeah, the music is quite nice. We should keep that for all the meetings.
Right.
Does he rent himself out by the hour? Is one question. And then the second one is, would there be value in perhaps, if I'm hearing folks correctly, this single court that was on the left and currently on the left is really more of a practice court where you're able to have lessons, and it's not going to impact the play of other players. I wonder if we were to go back to the proposed plan, and if we were to somehow figure out fencing off with a gate or whatever, but a fence in between one of the courts to isolate that for a practice court, leaving open 2, if there's value in that, or is that just a non-starter?
Any thoughts on that from anybody?
Like, say the one that is at the top of the page, if we were to put a fence in between the first, right down the line where her cursor is, with a gate on both ends, and that became the practice serving court, lesson court, whatever, would that
Yeah, I
be
think-
of value versus keeping all 3 at the same opening?
Yeah, I think Maria just said yes, that would be nice. My only concern is just the spatial layout of that is
Right. We'll have to,
but yeah, but I'm gonna Hannah, I see your hands up, so I'm gonna, there you go. You can unmute yourself.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, just on that, it's very narrow between the courts. And so I know that this doesn't have measurements on it, but I think if you tried to put up a fence in between them, it could create some safety hazards. Particularly for doubles play where you do use the full width of the courts, double lines as well.
Okay.
But I appreciate the suggestion and the interest in trying to preserve an isolated court for all the reasons you mentioned. So thank you.
And Diane? Hold on, I'm gonna get, there we go. Should be able to unmute yourself. Oh, still muted.
Nope. Hi,
There
everyone.
we go.
Can you hear
Perfect.
me?
Yep, we hear you.
Can you see me? There I am.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, anyway, I excited to see this plan, and I am a pickleball player and a heavy user of the South Street Court. And I would say that the South Street Court, although it does have 6 pickleball courts lined, if there's tennis being played or basketball, then you only have 2 pickleball courts. So in order for you to have 4 pickleball games going, you can't have any tennis, but you can have, someone on either side of the basketball. So it really is hard to be a good neighbor and share the court when you only have 2 pickleball courts if you're playing tennis there, even though, there's technically 2 tennis courts and 6 pickleball courts. I think in order for these 4 pickleball courts on the left, I mean, ideally you want 10-foot boundaries around all of the pickleball lines. I don't know, there aren't measurements here. So, I mean, just for, injuries or, I think it would be short-sighted to not line the tennis courts with pickleball lines. And I think we could all be good neighbors, and we could have a schedule where it's posted, where it's tennis certain times of the day or whatever, and pickleball others. I mean, we're all in a community. We all want to exercise and get out there and use our public resources. I live in JP, so all of these spaces are close to me. And so I think the hybrid is the most forward thinking. I mean, pickleball is growing enormously. In the space of 2 people playing tennis, 8 people play pickleball. And it's, just from children all the way up to, elderly people. Everybody's playing pickleball. It's just growing by leaps and bounds. And so this is exciting. I think the tennis courts should be lined for pickleball as well. And I think they should both be clearly, bright lines, and then everybody would get used to, it's not perfect, but I think it would be, we can all share this community space. So thank you for listening to me.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm curious because for some of the tennis players that had made comments about the line overlap issue, and like Diana mentioned, the high contrast of the color lines is the most ideal. At South Street, I think we did yellow on a purple and green color, if I remember correctly. So I'm curious, from a tennis user standpoint, is the high contrast still make it difficult, or is that more accommodating for an overlap of use? Looking at Hannah and Marie because I know you guys are tennis players.
Sorry, were you saying that the high contrast is preferred, or?
I'm asking you as a tennis player, do you find the high contrast do you find that distracting, or is that easier for tennis play?
So if I have my druthers, I'm always going to want to play on a court that doesn't have other markings. But if the choice is between more courts that are able to be used for the purpose of tennis or pickleball, I would advocate then that they're dually marked, because I understand that pickleball is a growing trend, but I also think it's unclear if it will sustain the way that tennis as an older sport has been around for quite some time. And so I think it would unfortunately be a little bit short-sighted to only keep the 4 single pickleball courts as such. I would personally prefer a plan that keeps the tennis courts and then marks half or all of them or whatever is decided as needed based on community needs for the potential for pickleball players as well.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So I'm following along in the chat as well. Susan had the counter statement that it's difficult to coordinate if they're dueling stripes, and raised the concern that we have lost tennis courts in the city. And again, reiterate some of the comments we've already gotten about just overlapping of the use, and with that overlap, tennis has, due to the popularity, which isn't a bad thing of pickleball, but tennis has had to move basically out of South Street. And she also notes that she's on the tee, so she can't chime in audibly. So just reading that. Marie asked what colors we used on Stony Brook. I'm not exactly sure on Stony Brook because that is a DCR court, not a Boston Parks one, but I think it's blue, white, and yellow. I'm not, don't quote me on that. So some of you may know better than that. Ellen, I see your hands up. Now I got to find you so I can let you on mute. Here you go, Ellen.
One of the things I just wanted to ask also is that Tenacity is the name of the group that's coming. It would be wonderful if there's a way that people can post when there's regular things like that happening. I know I was playing at Lamartine one day and somebody from the public school system said, oh, you have to leave. We use this every day for the kids, which is fine. I'm all for that. But it's really good. I think that also helps if people know what the schedule is where it's already set up for in use. And I don't know if there's any way to post something about that at the courts so that people know that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not exactly sure. I know if you go onto our permitting app, you can see if it is booked for certain times. So that's one way, like, if, you know, before you go out to the courts, you can check on that to see if it's in use while you're planning that. But because our permits can change from time, it would be hard to probably update that in real time. But whereas a permit like Tenacity that has it for an entire summer block, we can certainly look at some sort of signage that dictates or lets the community know probably the more prominent permit.
Yeah,
holders.
that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll raise
Thank
that
you.
up to our permitting department. Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Rachel, I see, and hold on one sec. You can unmute. There. Try again.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Hi. I'm sorry I joined late. I thought the meeting was at the wrong time. I live directly across the street here. And so I don't know if noise has been addressed, because I did hear that pickleball can get very noisy and disturb a lot of neighbors somewhere else. I'm an aspiring pickleball player, and I did have played a little bit of tennis, but right now I'm not active in either one of them. But I'm just wondering if there are certain hours, like, is this going to get shut down and go into quiet time? Is there going to be any sign posted, please do not make noise after 9 o'clock at night, or, you know, something to kind of mitigate noise for the neighbors?
The plan would be that the lighting is the same existing schedule than it is now, so it wouldn't be going any later into the evening. But yeah, no, the noise we did not address the noise of that earlier in the meeting, so you're bringing that up, and it's appreciated. Brendan or Farah, do you have any mitigation type thoughts on that?
Well, so unfortunately, I don't have a good answer that eliminates noise completely. I think a lot of it comes down to managing time of use so that the noise is during reasonable hours. Unfortunately, it's a plastic ball and a plastic paddle in layman's terms. So it is noisy by default now. You know, is it going to be any noisier than if there was a football game going? I don't think so personally, but we could try and mitigate it with screens, wind screens. Again, it's not a perfect solution, but short of building solid walls and a roof, I think there is a certain level of noise that comes with pickleball by default.
I guess I was also thinking about people making noise, like cheering and whatnot, and talking, and I don't know, does that
Hmm.
go on with pickleball as well? That could be,
I don't think it's any more than those rowdy tennis players, but we'll keep those to a minimum. I would say you're going to have much more noise from a football game or a soccer game right next door.
yeah, I mean, I currently I can hear the tennis ball being hit, but not people talking.
Mhm.
So you're saying pickleball is louder than tennis?
Well, the actual game is, but the people talking, I'm sure it's the same volume as tennis players.
Yeah, but the hitting of the ball is, I'm going to be hearing a lot more of that. And
So full disclosure, I am not a pickleball player, but I have heard many complaints since we have built many pickleball courts, and noise is definitely one of the byproducts of pickleball, unfortunately.
Yeah.
so how late are the lights on?
It's at 10 o'clock in the summer months, I think. I can double check on that. Let me check on that for you. One thing we also have that we could do here is that rather than having lights that stay on all of the time, we can add a push button activator. So when nobody is playing out there, the lights will actually go off. It's a energy conservation method that we've been implementing. So that's
Well, that seems
obviously
like a no-brainer for
Yeah, yeah.
so many reasons. That would be awesome.
right. I don't know if I'll have an answer for you right now on the lights, but I'll make sure I get back to you with that.
Yeah, 10 seems reasonable. 11 seems a little late.
I'm almost positive it's 10 o'clock and not 11, but yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you. Yep.
Yeah, and if the lights would go off automatically, that would appeal to my green sensibility, saving electricity. Okay, thank
Perfect.
you.
All right, thank you. Diane?
I think she was the one that was just talking. It might be she has to put her hand
Oh.
down.
Oh, no,
Or is that right? Did I get that wrong?
Hi,
no, I think. Yep, there you
No,
go.
but
You're good.
hi, everyone. I did have a chance to speak earlier, so if it's not my turn, I'm happy to.
It's no, I think it.
Okay, I just want to say, two things there. There are acoustic fences, and if the city's making this investment and those neighbors are really close on that one side, that maybe, they could look at acoustic fencing along that side where
Mhm.
that's closest to the houses. I think that seems really reasonable. And the other
And that-
comment I would make, oh, I'm sorry, what, Nathan?
Sorry, I just want to confirm that's on the side that says Brookside Ave. Is that correct? Is that the side we're talking about? Or are we talking?
I'm talking about the side that there isn't an entrance right now onto the tennis courts, but we all
Mhm.
use the hole in the fence.
Okay,
there.
yep. Okay, perfect. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other thing is regarding permits, and I know I just feel like the Parks Department, you can make a reservation for 3 hours or as long as you want for a space. And I really feel like that's not very equitable. For example, I also play a lot in Brookline, and Brookline residents can reserve court space for an hour or maybe an hour and a half. And I realize, a lot of people, we might play pickleball with 16, people, 24 people, whatever. But you shouldn't be able to reserve a community space on a Saturday for 3 or 4 hours. It doesn't seem like it's fair to everybody else. And that I think that's one of the
Mhm.
things that the city should look at where, if it's not a little league or not tenacity or, a community group like that, that maybe an hour and a half is a good amount of time to have a permit for a community space, and so that other people can also play. And it could be that you can stay longer if nobody else shows up, but I just think having this unlimited time that you can reserve the court space isn't equitable, even though I have benefited from it personally. And, a lot of us, book permits to play pickleball.
Right.
And take advantage of it, but I think the city should look at that.
I'll let the permitting department know for sure. And kudos to the endurance of doing 3 hours of pickleball or tennis, because I could not do that, either of those, for that long length of time. So I'm gonna go to John next, and then I will note that there's been several comments about windscreens as well. Both the benefit of trying to dampen some of the noise, but also the wind. So we can certainly look into those as well. The one thing we typically are doing those, or what we see is they can become damaged. So we can explore fencing options that may be able to dampen some of that. But the hung windscreens oftentimes will get cut or vandalized and then become in disrepair. John, go ahead.
Yeah, so I live on the Brookside Ave part there, and I don't, us on this side, I don't think we'd be happy about having the screen, the sound noise reduction, for the simple reason, the way it's oriented now, going from right to left, that's southwest, and that's where the summer breeze comes from. And it's a good breeze. And so I don't think we would want to lose that by having it cut off with some sort of, and I don't know what an acoustic fence looks like, but it's a fence and it's probably will cut down on the wind, and wouldn't like that at all.
Okay. Things to consider. Thank you. Rachel, you're next.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the acoustic fence also as well. I'm on the Union Ave side over there. And while I like the idea of no noise, I also like the idea of it looking nice and having a space to look long distance, like that. The fact that the fence is open, you can see, and that's really rewarding on a street, not having to walk next to this gigantic, I don't know what an acoustic fence looks like also, but I'm imagining it's gonna cut down on the view there. Even if the view is over a tennis court, it's kind of nice to see people playing tennis. So, I'm not really set on the idea of an acoustic fence either for that reason. And John brought up the wind reason too. There's enough barriers to breezes in our community as well. So I guess I don't really know how loud a pickleball court is, but I know I like the open feeling of that that fence there. I wouldn't mind seeing ivy growing up it. That would be really pretty. If you ask me. But okay, so that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm gonna try and catch up. I apologize to people in the chat.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and catch up and make sure I'm following along on some of that. Some of that's, I think, following our existing conversation pretty well. So Martha, just because yours just came in, is there a water source right around, actually Farah, do you want to answer that while I continue to read?
Right over here, there is an existing water fountain. We are looking into repair, reconnecting that and keeping that, or sort of installing a new water fountain. Another question that came in that we missed quite a while back was from Peter. Actually, Peter, I see your hand up. Peter, about lighting. And I'm happy to answer that, but maybe we'll let you unmute and ask any other questions.
Hold on, I think you're still muted, Peter. I can't hear you.
It's strange. He's unmuted, but we can't hear.
Yeah, I can't
Oh.
hear you. And I apologize that I missed your question, by the way.
No, yeah, I guess I can start answering the lighting question. For the basketball courts, the new lights, there would only, existing lights, there is 4 of them. For new lighting, there would only need to be 2 at the half court marks of each court. So that would consolidate the 4 that are existing to 2. At the tennis court existing, there are 9 lights. In the new plan, there would be 6, 1 at each court. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
perfect. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, as many people have said, for organizing this and walking us through your plan. I think it's quite exciting to see the addition of pickleball courts. And I will say, I was just looking at some of our listservs on pickleball, and you probably know there's a very active group of pickleball players. And the listserv now of pickleball players in JP is at over 360 players. So I think there's a real demand for this kind of dedicated pickleball courts. I will also say that things like Saturday mornings, especially during the summer, when Karen and others have organized open play, have been really great opportunities to bring new people in, to make court space available for experienced and new players. And I think we've clearly run out of space there. And having these additional pickleball court spaces would go a long way to helping alleviate some of the overcrowding and waiting for the pickleball courts that we often have at the South Street locations. So I think there's incredible demand. There are hundreds of players in JP, and I think we will expect to see that increase exponentially in the years to come here. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. One thing I did put in the chat, where there's been some discussion of just the overlapping of tennis and pickleball. It is worth noting that a tennis net is actually not the correct height for pickleball. So even when there is overlap, as some tennis people have noted, the lines can be confusing, but also the net is an improper height for pickleball. So it's not, although it does allow a court to be multi-use, it's not an ideal necessarily for either user group. So just wanted to make sure I noted that. All right. Farah, were you able to see, did we have any other missed questions in the chat?
Not that I could see. I mean, maybe we'll open it up for anybody who does feel like they've maybe said something that we missed, but as far as I looked through, everything was kind of discussed or answered.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so if anybody, I apologize if I missed your question in the chat. You all have been very, very chatty, which is actually great. I'm not, it's just, I've been keeping up with it. One thing we haven't talked about though is the court coloring. And so right now we kind of, these are our standard colors of the maroon and green. And then the basketball has more of like a fire truck red. So we are going to look at changing the colors here. One of the things we've been doing is actually a lighter color palette. as often as we can. One, it actually helps reflect some of the heat island impacts of these larger court areas. We have looked at doing it in a way that the courts are not so bright. So we've been doing gray tones, and that's usually on the outer play areas. One of the things I initially thought, just because English is the blue color and the proximity to English High here, just the center play areas being a blue color to match the school. So I'm curious if anybody has thoughts on seal coding colors.
US Open's blue court too, Nate, just saying.
Right. Yeah, but they're not as good as English High, so come on. Any thoughts on that, Ellen?
It's kind of on the same line, but are there options for different surface coats? Because I've noticed some courts I play on, it could mist, and I'm gonna fall, it's so slippery. And other courts I've played on are a little bit wet and they're not slippery. And I don't know the first thing about surfaces, but
Sure.
I just, to throw that in with the color, I'm very curious.
Have you played at South Street Mall?
I find that very slippery.
Huh.
I find
Okay,
that
'cause
to be a
that's-
place where I've taken some spills when it's damp. And
Sure.
I've played at other courts where it's not quite as slippery when it's damp.
Do you, if you don't mind sharing, and if you don't remember it off the top of your head, that's fine. If you could just let me know what those courts are, and I can certainly look into that. Brandon and Farah, do you want to talk about the surfacing materials
Sure.
that we typically
Yeah,
use?
so I'd be happy to. We work with several manufacturers, but it's more or less all the same. It is approved tennis court surfacing. One of the manufacturers is the same manufacturer that supplies the surfacing for the US Open. It's actually a proprietary color and you can't actually use it other than the US Open. But that being said, the surfacing itself has a sand, a very fine sand mixture in it. And it's more or less a sandpaper texture when it goes down. Now we can control the texture by having them add more sand or reducing the sand. But so we control the playability, the slippage of the surfacing through specifications. But the texture itself is very gritty. It gets rolled out onto the asphalt seal coat course. Some players like more slip because it allows them to drag their feet. Others don't like it because it's obviously slipperier. So, we usually go with sort of what is a baseline standard minimum coefficient of friction that's required for seal coating of courts, particularly basketball and tennis, as well as pickleball. But if there's someone who is way more into tennis and pickleball than I am and can point to a court that is ideal, we're happy to go visit it.
Yeah, Ellen, I had mentioned Warren Street in Brookline, so we can certainly reach out to our colleagues at Brookline and see what materials they're using. There's one question about just looking at some examples of this gray colors. So Farah, are you able to quickly just do like a Google Maps walk
Sure.
around with us for real quick?
Yeah,
First one is
sure.
Di Filippo Park in the north end.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I assume you can still see only the presentation.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're gonna have to
All right.
switch to
Let
what?
me share.
Of course, it's bleached out, but
Yeah, that is probably a bit lighter than it actually looks. But
Yeah.
that's one example of a gray color. Yeah, see if you can see there, it's not quite as vibrant.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
what we're seeing is that we actually do get cooler surfaces with the lighter colors than with the dark green and the dark red. Another one you can look at, it's a little bit older, Farah, is
Yeah.
Ramsey Park.
Ramsey. Okay.
This one yeah, you're gonna see we did the basketball, or the tennis still does have
yeah.
the darker color. But the basketball is that lighter gray. That was where we first piloted that, just seeing how where we got a similar condition and we could actually take measurements off the two court just to see color contrast, or
Mhm.
sorry, temperature contrast.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
so those are just some examples of course, we've done. Sorry, I gotta get the chat back.
Yeah, so some comments about blue being pleasing and a good option. So that's great.
It's not quite
Okay.
the same, but the street hockey court at Ryan Playground in Charlestown is blue and gray.
Oh yeah, that's another good one.
Yeah.
And then also the street hockey at Oakley.
Mm.
So as you can see, we're trying to certainly look at the impacts courts have on urban heat island effect and seeing if there's ways we can mitigate that as well. So just being conscious of our time tonight. I know some people have already had to jump off. I don't know if we have an overall consensus. So what I will do is I'm going to regroup with Farah and Brandon, and we'll work on seeing if we can push and pull some of the things we talked about, and we'll regroup and we'll reach back out to you when we feel like we've made some progress on that. So again, I'm going to add my email to the chat. If anybody did not speak, or you think of something else later, feel free to send me an email. Also going to post in the chat the project website. So tonight's recording will be posted on that, as well as a presentation and meeting notes. So any neighbors, friends, pickleball, tennis players that weren't able to attend, share it with them and make sure they can share their feedback as well. English. Sorry, I'm getting to the City of Boston's website for the presentation, or the page link. I should have had it already copied. It's not coming up. Give me 1 second and I will send the link
Hey,
for
is
that.
it the one on the is it the one in the
Presentation?
presentation?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Let me.
Which I think it's yes. There you go.
Yeah, there it is.
Perfect. Great. So with that being said, unless there's any last minute questions, comments, or thoughts, I think we can all get to our Valentine evening. So thank you all. Appreciate you coming out and spending your Valentine's with us.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Have to.